Can you explain the Radar's product and also technology at a high level? What was the problem and how does Radar solve this problem in the region?
Yeah. Radar wants to drive the future of autonomous finance. The problem is that we focus on enterprise businesses, so say companies that are generating more than $500,000 a month in revenues. These companies reach a critical scale where their finance processes are a total mess. So just to take like a very specific example, one of our key products is reconciliation. Almost any business across the world, and this isn't just Mexico or Chile, has a bank account on one side with all the money coming in, has the ERP on the other side with all the money that you expect to come in, and they never match up. I sent out 5 invoices, I got 10 payments. And how do you know which clients that associates to? And if you don't know that, how do you manage your cash flows? How do you manage forecasts? How do you automate money movement? Everything comes from that basic understanding of the data behind your money. And so what we're helping our clients do to start, our first products are payment reconciliation, and then automating payouts, being able to move money out, whether it's to providers, to clients, to payroll, whatever those different cases are of needing to move money out of your company. And as we grow, we want to move towards really using these elements of basic understanding of the data behind money and the money movement to help treasurers better understand cash flows and make decisions.
Amanda, how are you? Welcome.
Good morning or good evening for you. Good to see you again, Barak.
Can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to join Radar? And follow-up question, explain us the Radar.
Yeah. Happy to. So I was taking a huge leap back. I'm originally from Los Angeles, studied business and psychology at Emory University. After college, wasn't really excited about the traditional opportunities of working on Wall Street or being in consulting. So I went actually to a fellowship in social enterprise in India. So I spent the beginning of my career 6 months in India, learned a lot about, I was actually with a fund called IntelliCap. And so I learned a lot about just kind of trends in different types of social entrepreneurship. Came back to the US, had to hustle for 6 months, literally applied to 100 jobs, just terrible job market, drove for Lyft, drove for Sidecar. My car was too old for Uber. And finally, I got an opportunity with Village Capital. Village Capital is a global accelerator and VC fund. They are launching a health program in Boston. So I moved from LA to Boston, worked part-time, basically buying pizza for entrepreneurs. And part-time on weekends, I gave out yogurt samples in the Whole Foods. And through that, it gave me the opportunity to join Village Capital when they were doing their first program in Mexico at the very beginning of the Fintech wave in before I even knew what Fintech meant. So took the risk, came to Mexico, 23-year-old, didn't know what I was doing, but worked really hard, found really good entrepreneurs, built a network of entrepreneurs. And from there, my job was over. Basically, the program was done. I was kind of afraid I'd have to apply to another 100 jobs. And so I kind of thought about like, where are the gaps with Village Capital? And I asked, can I just stay in Mexico and help us find more funding? Can I find another sponsor? And I was lucky enough that they took the risk on me. So they gave me a few more months in Mexico. We eventually got Crédito Real, a local financial institution, to fund us, complemented by PayPal, other international funds. And that gave me a platform to start building Village Capital across Latin America, expanded to Mexico, from Mexico to Colombia, Argentina, and Chile. And from there, Compartamos Banco, the largest microfinance institution in Latin America, invited me to to manage their venture capital fund. So amazing opportunity to jump from the accelerator side to the VC side, managed a portfolio of financial inclusion ventures across the region until I got that itch that a lot of investors get, that I just wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to not be on the board and seeing trends, but actually doing the experiments, building, operating. And that was when Valash and Gabo, the founders of Oyster, which was a Mexican neobank for SMBs, for small businesses, they invited me to join as head of business development, and I grew into chief of staff role. And so I had the last 3 years of experience building a neobank in Mexico up to 100 users. It was acquired by Yedu, stepped out, took a quick sabbatical, and that was when I decided it was my turn to really start something myself. Started to look for co-founders for ideas, looking for all the resources, joined the Latitude Accelerator. I was in the Maya Capital Founder Matching Program, online looking for co-founders on Y Combinator's site, just kind of anything I could. And in that search, I spoke with a ton of investors to see what they were seeing. And I was lucky to speak with Hayden Simmons over at RallyCap, who introduced me to a bunch of the companies in his portfolio, one of which was Radar. So Radar actually was founded before I joined as a co-founder, but they were just doing payouts in Chile, looking at Mexico So looking at the bigger vision, where did they want to go from there? So I brought a lot of different elements to the table to complement the team, helped the team kind of as an external consultant for a few months, expanding into Mexico. And then to kind of seal the deal, they invited me to what we call Radar Paradise, our annual retreat. So at the time it was 3 co-founders, 3 employees, and me locked in a house in Zapallar in the beach in Mexico for 10 days, which is probably one of my best pieces of advice. Like if you're joining a team as a co-founder, you want to meet, get to know your co-founders, lock yourselves in a house for 10 days. You really start to learn, do you get along? How do people think? You got to have a lot of just like late night conversations and like, why are we here? What do we want to do with this company? Do we want to exit? Do we want to be more sustainable? Like, what do we value as a company? And all those little things you don't really have time for in an office or even more in a remote situation. Love the team, critical thinking, the way that they had very clear revenue focus, very focused team, but more than anything, just like a very human team, people that really listened, that really cared about everybody's opinions. And we just enjoyed like playing board games all night. And so it was just such a great vibe that I was lucky enough for the team to invite me as a 4th co-founder. And I've now been with the company almost a year.
What is the difference being a co-founder and also venture capitalist?
Yeah, I feel like as a VC, you get this amazing view of trends and how the pieces of the puzzle come together. You get to see this strategy layer. Like you're jumping into these board meetings and you're getting these quick sound bites of how things are moving. And it's like, oh, obvious. Don't focus on that. Focus here. You need this other kind of revenue model. You could see how things compare across the world. So it's like nice because you have your head out of the sand. But as an entrepreneur, what I really enjoy is having my head in the sand, like being able to really have, you say in Spanish, manos en la masa. You're getting your hands dirty, being able to experiment and just not just see at a high level, like, oh, I think that this new product will work, or we should kill this other product line, or whatever that strategy is. But cool, let's figure out how we're going to MVP this. Let's experiment and figure out how we're going to iterate. And being able to really not just see the strategic side, but also see how are we going to implement this and learn? Because at the end of the day, nobody really knows what's right or wrong. And when you look in foresight, everything makes a ton of sense. But looking forward, you're like, I don't really know if we should change our business model. I don't really know if we should go to a new country. How do we test this? And to me, that's like the most rich, most fun thing, to work with the team to do all these experiments.
Can you explain the Radar's product and also technology at a high level? What was the problem and how does Radar solve this problem in the region?
Yeah. Radar wants to drive the future of autonomous finance. The problem is that we focus on enterprise businesses, so say companies that are generating more than $500,000 a month in revenues. These companies reach a critical scale where their finance processes are a total mess. So just to take like a very specific example, one of our key products is reconciliation. Almost any business across the world, and this isn't just Mexico or Chile, has a bank account on one side with all the money coming in, has the ERP on the other side with all the money that you expect to come in, and they never match up. I sent out 5 invoices, I got 10 payments. And how do you know which clients that associates to? And if you don't know that, how do you manage your cash flows? How do you manage forecasts? How do you automate money movement? Everything comes from that basic understanding of the data behind your money. And so what we're helping our clients do to start, our first products are payment reconciliation, and then automating payouts, being able to move money out, whether it's to providers, to clients, to payroll, whatever those different cases are of needing to move money out of your company. And as we grow, we want to move towards really using these elements of basic understanding of the data behind money and the money movement to help treasurers better understand cash flows and make decisions.
Perfect pitch.
Thank you.
How do you approach product and market fit? How did you understand that this is working?
Yeah, I think that that's always the biggest challenge with any startup. And at the end of the day, our goal, and we steal this a lot from Superhuman, is build something our clients can't live without. Not just having the NPS of how many people give us a thumbs up, but how many people would really be sad if we disappeared. And how do we build a product that hits that core need? And the only way to do that is listen to the clients and iterate. And so right now we're in a state, do have impressive traction. So we've moved more than 2 million payments. We've moved $400 million for our clients, but we just raised our seed round. So we've raised in total $2 million to date. We should be coming out with that new press release soon. But at this stage, it's still all about founder-led sales. It's about the founders being super close with the clients, empowering the team to be able to reach new clients and hear from all over the company, us hearing directly from the clients and being able to to iterate. So for example, we want to move fast. We have two co-founders. So me and the CEO, Herbert, are here in Mexico. We have two co-founders in Chile. So Gabo, who's our CTO, and Rafa, our Chief Growth Officer, are in Chile. And we told Gabo, our CTO, like, could you please come up here? We just want to move faster. We want to be able to work hands-on. So flew up for the week. It was Thursday night, and we'd been speaking to one of the largest insurance companies in Mexico with some sticky challenges that they have. And as a team, we're like, well, why don't we just go to their office? And so Thursday night, wrote the client, hey, by chance, are you available tomorrow? Our CTO's in town. We want to meet you in person. They said yes. We were super lucky. The three of us went to their office, spent a couple hours, like literally seeing their computer, drawing on their board, their workflows, like understand the depth of the problems. And so I think coming back to your question, like how do we validate product market fit is staying super close to the clients and iterating. So maybe we're building one small feature, even if it's a no code or low code feature, not always a huge, robust development, but starting with something small, seeing if that works for a client, and then replicating it.
How do you assess the competitive landscape for treasury management solutions in Latin America? Are there any other solutions in the market?
It's pretty much a blue ocean. So when we speak with clients, what we mostly hear is never heard of this before. We do everything in Excel. Or SAP has a reconciliation function, but it's only kind of one-to-one. Like if it's an exact match for the date and the name and the amount, but all these exceptions waste a ton of time for our team. Or there's a couple cases where we've seen multinational companies that use like Kiriba, modern Treasury starting to look at LATAM too, but it's more of these international solutions. And then we're seeing also substitutes or competitors that are currently kind of in different areas, but could overlap, that are also kind of opening the market for us. So for example, you might have seen Symmetric just raised a huge round. Congrats to them. They focus really on the highest end of enterprise. So like FEMSA, which owns Oxxo, Mercado Libre, Rappi, these huge multinational companies, and they focus mostly on the wallet side. So when I get money into my company, being, say, Mercado Libre, how do I know that it should go to Amanda's Mercado Pago wallet or Barack's Mercado Pago wallet? So it's more on a ledgering level, whereas we go and we speak with the treasury team, not the product team, to help understand the entire company's finances and manage their cash flows. So the core technology is still reconciliation, but there's different use cases that different startups are exploring.
Is it also a problem in North America or other countries or other geographies?
Completely. And we even, in Europe, we've seen exits even. We have Kiriba, the company I mentioned, was valued in over $1 billion. Modern Treasury is probably one of the biggest sweethearts of the startup ecosystem in Treasury. Very quickly, they grew and they've really dominated with amazing work with clients like Venmo and other great wallets. In Europe and the US, this is a huge problem, but it's kind of solved already to a degree. I'm sure that there's still a lot of room for innovation, but you come to Latin America, we're still on Excel. We're still jumping between all these different manual sheets and PDFs. It's a challenge even just to download information from your bank. We don't have bank APIs in Latin America. They're just starting to come out. So it's something very cool when you're in Latin America to be able to see what happened 10, 20 years ago in more developed markets. And it's not a copy paste, but you could start to see these patterns of like, oh, banks will eventually have APIs. What will that mean to our product roadmap? Maybe we don't want to focus on just this transactional space because the banks could replace us one day. We want to be in this higher order information space or treasury management space on top of those layers. How do we work with the banks so that they could build faster and integrate with our vision as well? So we do see this problem abroad, but it's really solved abroad in emerging markets. And I've even heard in Africa and Southeast Asia, there's some new competitors coming out. There's a huge opportunity to grow across emerging markets and treasury management.
You recently raised the seed round for Radar. What was the fundraising experience like? And how do you communicate your vision and progress to investors or other angels?
Yeah, definitely a challenge. Like this isn't 20 anymore. Like we're definitely, money is tighter, especially in Latin America. Investors are more risk averse. So there's less investment for companies that don't yet have product market fit. We're lucky that we are hitting strong revenues, that we do have one co-founder, Herbert, was already a serial entrepreneur. He had 2 fintech companies before. Me being from the investor world, I also am fairly well connected. Still a challenge. It took us 5 months end to end to close and have money in the banks. But I think what most helped us was Just kind of when you realize that VCs are humans too. And I know that you've been over this in some of your other podcasts, but like not going in with like my pitch deck and showing like 20 minutes of talking about my pitch and then waiting for the email back. I think when you realize that investors are people who are intellectually curious, who've seen really interesting things that could be mentors, and it becomes a two-way conversation of like, I'll show you my deck, feel free to interrupt me. And then just kind of like jive of like, hey, what have you seen in treasury management and other geographies? Do you think that we're approaching this the right way? Not feeling like you need to know it all, but talking to an investor, also looking for advice. This is our business model today, but do you think that we could do this differently? That builds a lot of trust. It builds a lot of openness, especially in this seed, pre-seed stage. Also, I think that something that we did really well is focusing on sharing the right amount of data. It's always very controversial with startups of how much data to share and how transparent to be. We definitely have layers of like the first deck we share that doesn't have all our financials. If investors seem serious, then we'll give them more details about unit economics and all that. But in my opinion, it really helps to have a simple deal room. Like I know, Burak, you could speak from your perspective, but when Burak came, we spoke with Startup Istanbul. It was a 2-week process. All the information was there on the table. You were able to look at it. You were able to agree, disagree. I understand that opens the conversation for VCs to poke holes at the startup, but it also, when you see that from the other perspective, it opens up a conversation that's more honest and mature about like, maybe the VC doesn't agree with stuff and maybe they're right. Like maybe there's something that we could learn and have that open conversation.
Probably your experience in venture capital business has a positive impact, especially pitching and also preparing for all the data room. Do you think also it affected the process of fundraising?
Completely. I think it really helped to have a background in a VC. Like, I guess if I'm going to give advice to somebody who's at early in their career listening to this podcast and like not sure where you want to start, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. But if you're not sure, I think VC is also a good choice. It's one of the many good choices you could take because you learn how to think strategically and you learn what investors are looking for. So when I came into calls, I was prepared as kind of that element of investor readiness that a lot of accelerators help with. I understood those basic ideas of like almost all investors are going to ask you the same things. They want to know, is this the right team to solve the problem? What is the problem? What is the solution? Is the market big enough? Some will want to know about exit opportunities and kind of all the double click into those areas. So with my mind, like even evaluating joining Radar, I was already looking at it like an investor of like, is this the right team to bring the solution to market? Yes, they all have some kind of a fintech or banking experience. Is this a big enough problem? Is this not just like some little niche problem? Completely. This is a global problem of being able to automate money movement and automate finances for companies. Being able to see all that made it so much easier that when I was with the company, I could also work on those problems and have that intellectual challenge of I need to understand the business model. I need to understand how are we doing pricing for each client. So then when I come with investors, they're just asking the same questions. So I think it really helps you to think strategically and get your head out of the day-to-day, be a little bit less of just like looking at your nose and what's in front of you and being able to see the future, having that investor background.
How does building a fintech startup in Latin America differ from the US startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think, and you could kind of see this again with the 20 period of where there was this investment boom and we all grew too fast. I think in Latin America, we look or we aspire a lot to be Silicon Valley and we aspire to be like those companies. So there was a period of time when we were lucky enough to have access to a lot of capital. A lot of foreign investors came and invested in Latin America and companies accepted rounds of capital that were way too huge, hired way too many people, grew way too fast. We're much more focused on growth and then we'll figure out monetization later. And that does not work in Latin America the way that it works in more developed markets like Silicon Valley, the US, etc. And so I think that the most important thing about building a company in Latin America today is you really need to focus on product market fit. You really need to focus on having a vision for profitability. It's good to grow your client base, but you need to make sure that churn is low and that you understand the client's needs, and then you grow and then you raise capital. So like with Radar, we went went through a really robust process of reviewing our finances, seeing exactly how much money do we need for the next 18 to 24 months, arguably a bit more, and then figuring out, great, this round needs to be 1 million. We don't need to over dilute ourselves, and we don't want to grow our team too much. Today, we're almost 20 people. I'd like to keep the team under 30 people this year. I'd like to keep the expenses under, or like the burn under 100 this year. And I think that in the US, it's more of a mindset of raise as much as you can, grow as fast as you can. We'll figure it out later. In Latin America, you need to focus on product market fit and profitability. Otherwise, you're running really high risks.
Startup Chile is a great program for especially founders in the region. As far as I know, Radar has also been selected at Startup Chile and also graduated from the program. So what was the experience? I know that you have joined the team afterwards probably, but what is the experience of Startup Chile?
Yeah, so we were actually in two programs. We were in the early stage program, and then recently, the end of last year, we were also accepted into their high growth program. And it was an amazing opportunity to get mentors, hear different perspectives. Again, as an entrepreneur, you're always so much in the day to day that sometimes when you force yourself to have those spaces to just listen and hear other perspectives, it's super helpful to have people, again, poking holes at the way that you're building things and telling you, I think maybe this way and that way. It's not that your mentors are always going to have the answers, but they'll definitely make you think. So I think that the mentorship from Startup Chile was very helpful. And just from my previous experience, you see a ton of companies, more kind of on a macro level, coming out of Chile. Like we see it kind of as a semillero or as this kind of sandbox. It's a very small country. Just to kind of understand, in Mexico City, we're like 25 million people. The country of Chile is like 17 million people. The country of Chile has less people than the city of Mexico. And so in that, it's not a market that's very easy to scale in, but it's a great market to have a proof of concept and then go and expand across Latin America. And especially this year, we're seeing a ton of great Chilean entrepreneurs coming and exploring the Mexican market.
What key trends are you seeing in Latin America startups and fintech ecosystem right now? And should you give me especially which kinds of geographies are booming in Latin America, like Chile, Mexico?
Yeah. I mean, Mexico and Brazil have always been the star markets in Latin America because we have the biggest populations, more advanced startup ecosystems. There's entrepreneurs, there's accelerators. You start to see innovation centers and companies, so it's easier to do those enterprise sales. There's more technology adoption. I think something that's really important is that trend in like high mobile penetration, more and more use of wallets. Brazil has been amazing in the way that they've been able to digitize their population. That's an entire case study of how Pix and QR codes has exploded in the last few years. And then the rest of Latin America there's great markets, there's amazing entrepreneurs, but I think that it's a bigger challenge. And it depends exactly what you're trying to build and for who. But we're seeing a lot of innovation come out of Argentina, Peru, Colombia, and a lot of entrepreneurs from a little bit from everywhere. Interestingly, something that Colombia has going for it that's a little bit better than Mexico is it's easier to do sales. It's a culture that people are a lot more direct. The sales cycles are a lot shorter. While it is a smaller market size in terms of population, they do things really well in Colombia. So we've even seen lately, there's been a few companies that have been leaving Mexico because it is a hard market and it is very competitive, but the opportunity is here as well.
Are there any particular resources or networks that have been helpful to you as a founder in Latin America?
I think there's so many different networks and communities, but for me personally, because I was a Latitude Fellow, that's been very helpful. And beyond the actual content and the education that they give you, it's being able to have this network of hundreds of experienced entrepreneurs, all in different sectors and different stages in different countries that you get bounce ideas off of. So being able to just go in WhatsApp and be like, hey, how are people finding good engineers? Or I want to start giving ESOP to my company. What are other people doing? And being able to see not just like, what does the Silicon Valley blog say, but what are people actually doing in Latin America and being able to bounce ideas off of entrepreneurs who have been there or are in the same stage as you has been super helpful for me.
How does your experience living and working in different Latin America countries influence your perspective?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that when you're here, you see the reality of what people's needs are and how business moves. And it depends what your solution is. But like, for example, I've focused a ton on financial inclusion. And when you go to these forums or like you come out of the university, you're like, oh man, we just need to help the poor people have more bank accounts. And it's like, it's so much more than that. And like something that we see a lot in Latin America or in Mexico especially is there's still a lot of talk about financial inclusion in terms of only 60% of Mexicans have bank accounts. But the reality is the rest don't want bank accounts. It's not a question of access. It's a question of having the right products that actually help people and not just forcing technology because it sounds good. So I think that living in different countries in Latin America, you're able to see what are people's real problems. People love cash. It's not their problem. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, wow, I wish I had another debit card. Like there's other more structural problems behind that to solve. And then I think that the other thing is as you travel across Latin America, you're able to be inspired of like, oh, but things can change. So like I remember in Mexico, again, huge cash economy. We had an investment when I was at Comportamos Banco in Brazil, went to Sao Paulo, had a free weekend, just walking around. I'm in just some random park and I see this guy walking with like this huge pizza box, like a Domino's box. And in one hand, he's like holding the box. In the other hand, he has a physical payment terminal, like not like some little square type, like key fob. He has a whole payment terminal in his hand. And then I see somebody kind of raise their hand, buys a slice of pizza from just this kind of person selling pizza in the street and pays with a credit card in a terminal. And it just kind of like blew my mind of like, what makes a person want to use a credit card to buy pizza in the street? And how could Mexico get there? And why would Mexico get there? So I think that there's something really exciting to go across different countries in Latin America and see what are the different ways that countries are solving, in this case, not just financial inclusion, meaning how many people have credit cards or debit cards, but really financial health and understanding how to help people either through implicit user experience or through behaviors or through incentives, use better technology that enables them to be formalized, that enables them to have other products that they might need, like a loan in a case of an emergency, or an insurance product that is very much not part of the culture, but is super helpful when you come into these huge problems that could be integrated into the user experience of other products.
What have been the biggest personal lessons and learnings as being a founder?
Yeah. I think one of the learnings for me is, I would say something like very specific to working at Radar compared to other companies that I've been at, is I've seen a lot of the model and like I'll hear it in a lot of different podcasts and see it across the world, this kind of like command and control type of leadership of like this vision of like that brilliant founder who just kind of knows everything, the Steve Jobs who just thinks, who sees the world differently, and everybody kind of praises this one guy who has all the answers. And while the team has high expectations and everybody's empowered to build something, really not everybody's opinion counts the same as that central leader. And I think something that's been really healthy and important at Radar is our culture of collaboration and our culture of listening, which is something that I think at this level I've rarely seen in other working environments. I think one of the most important things that I've learned is like working with Herbert, our CEO. One of the things that he told me this week, I was talking about exactly this culture and like how he sees it. And he said, look, we're hiring brilliant people. I totally agree. Why would we not count on their opinions? Like, why would we waste our time not listening to them? Either there's a problem that we're not hiring the right people if we don't want to hear their opinions, or if we're really doing this great job of hiring such brilliant people, we need to like take a break and pause and listen and reflect and understand why people might disagree with what the leadership's saying. And I think that that's something that's so important to building a culture. And especially like if you can't nail that in the first days of the startup, when you're to thousands of people, you're never going to be able to build that culture. And so I think being able to institutionalize this culture of having clarity for the team, good feedback, and then also listening, the leadership listening to the entire team has been something super helpful in our success.
What do you wish you had known when you first started as a founder?
Frankly, we're still at the beginning of this journey and there's so much more to learn.
Or I can reframe the question. If you go
please.
back 2 years ago, what advice would you give to yourself?
Yeah. Okay. That one resounds with me. So I think looking back, what the advice I'd give to myself today is just be patient with yourself. Like, I think when you see the future and everything kind of works out, all the waves and the trouble and the process, kind of it all flattens out. And so I think when you're in the middle of the most challenging things and you're about to lose the client and you have the employee who's super pissed off for something and you can't hire the right people for something else, and you have like all these challenges in the day-to-day, it could really get get you down. But I think when you could see a bit more towards the middle or the end of that journey, or you could see kind of like the good sides of like when you're closing that funding round and when you have an amazing team that like you could go on vacation and just trust that they could build everything. I think the advice is just trust in the process, trust in the journey, enjoy it. Don't let the day-to-day weigh you down and stress you out too much. Yeah.
What are the books, podcasts, and movies that you recently watched, listened, read?
I mean, I'm a little bit all over the place because I read also like a lot of fiction and whatnot, but I'd say in terms of startups and like what I would recommend, definitely I started my career listening every single day to the 20-minute VC. When I was starting as a VC and kind of like, I have no idea if I could do this, I would bike to the office every day and just listen to that podcast and hearing all the different experiences of different VCs and different entrepreneurs. And a lot of what you're doing here at Startup Chile also is something that's so helpful to hear other people's journeys and how they made it there and how people are seeing things. Kind of outside of the startup world, I'm an addict to Huberman Lab podcast, like totally just like nerding out on science and best practices and how I could be a more healthy person. Everything from like how to brush your teeth to how to create your training schedule. Like it's super interesting. And then in terms of books, for me, The Hard Things About Hard Things is a fantastic book that just kind of brings you through the entrepreneur experience. And on the fiction side, in the last year, one of the books that was most heavy or impactful, but I think also really well written it's called Temporada de Huracanes, Hurricane Season, by Fernanda Melchor, female writer from Latin America. And just kind of like the hard reality of poverty in Veracruz, Mexico. I think it's important to see how different people live. And I think that even though it's a very heavy book, it's also very well written.
Do you have a work-life balance?
Yeah, you know what? I think I do. And I think, I mean, let's be honest, it comes in waves. Like, I think that there's sometimes that I prioritize more of the life piece. And like, let's say last year, I wanted to hike Pico de Orizaba. It's the biggest mountain in Mexico, over 5 meters, almost 20 feet. It took a lot of training to get there. So like, I made sure every day in the morning I exercised and I was eating well. And like, that was something really important to me. And like, maybe I wasn't at my desk at 9 a.m. every morning, but I made sure everything got done. And if that meant working a bit more in evenings or weekends, like I was able to prioritize that life piece. And there's other times where it's, you know what, this month, I really need to close this client. I really need to work on this product, and I'll sacrifice a bit of that. And so I think there's also an element of like not being too hard on yourself, not being too hard on myself, but always keeping that true north of like, there's no true hack. It's just eat well, exercise first thing in the morning so you have no excuse, sleep. I need 8 hours, hopefully 8 hours when I can. And everything else just kind of falls into place.
Amanda, thank you very much. It was a nice conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure.